Okay, morning everybody. Here's the question. Is Nvidia trying to look after its own hide, or is it actually invested in building AI in a way that makes US the supreme power when it comes to AI? It's hard to say. Maybe it's a bit of both. But this definitely begs the question. I mean, this is definitely a good question to ask because Nvidia is the rising tide that raises all other AI boats. It is the one player that absolutely benefits from every development, from every funding event that happens into an AI company. Let me explain, right? There's been a lot of hullabaloo about Nvidia's the export control that was imposed by the U.S. government that hit Nvidia's revenue where it hurts. I mean, Nvidia makes a ton of money from China. In fact, 13% of its revenue, which is almost like, what, 1/6 of Nvidia's revenue, comes from China. It's a huge market. And we've seen that for most big tech companies that are based in the US, China is a tremendous market share. For any of them, whether you mention Tesla, Apple, whatever other big tech corporation. I mean, you know, Google had to pull out YouTube from China, and that hurt it a lot when YouTube got banned. But the fact of the matter is, China is such a huge, massive market that you can't expect to be competitive if you're not catering to the Chinese market. And that has Nvidia shaking in its boots. I'm not going to lie, the export control has Nvidia shaking in its boots. But they did maneuver around this export control, and now the US government is kind of getting a bit lax around this control. Jensen Huang must have a silver tongue. Look, I'm not trying to point fingers. I genuinely think that Jensen Huang is invested in American supremacy when it comes to the AI. I don't want to call it the arms race, but it kind of feels like an arms race. But the fact of the matter is, Jensen Huang is going to be selling the shovels in this gold rush. I'm not pointing fingers. I just think that this is an incredibly beneficial situation for Jensen Huang. Let's talk about this export control a bit more. And I'm going to backdrop it with the case study that I keep bringing up, which is the case study of DeepSeek and why it didn't get proper adoption in the US. Anyway, long story short, the H20 chips are good to go into the Chinese markets. The H100 line of Blackwell chips are not, right? There's a big difference between these two chips. Obviously, the H100 chips are better in terms of performance. They're more sophisticated, they're more technologically complex, they have more robust architecture, higher performing than H20. Except when it comes to inference. The H20 chips are actually better than the H100 chips when it comes to inference. And these are the chips that are going to slip through the export control and make their way into China. Now, what does that mean? That means that China is finally going to be able to get models like DeepSeek set up with proper inference infrastructure. What does that mean for you and me? Whenever you're trying to research something or look up an answer or solve a coding problem, instead of exclusively going to Claude or ChatGPT, you are now going to consider going to DeepSeek as well, because they're not going to time out in terms of the requests, because the how quickly they come back with a response is going to be much better. It's going to be much quicker coming up with a response. It's not going to drop requests and whatnot, because inference is basically the AI models performing. You give them a task and they perform, right? That's not training. That's different from training. The H100 chips are still going to be far superior to the H20 chips when it comes to training AI models. But when it comes to using AI models, the H20 chips actually give you an edge, right? So this is going to let China set up proper infrastructure for its models like DeepSeek, which is going to give all the other, let's call them software plays in AI, the AI companies that are building these frontier models, a run for their money. Because OpenAI, Google, Meta, Microsoft, all these companies that are building frontier models and hosting them for inference to be used by everybody in society, all consumers, is going to get a run for their money, because now they're going to compete with a very capable and very inference capable DeepSeek model, right? But no matter what, Nvidia wins, because Nvidia is going to be selling the shovels to the company behind DeepSeek, to all the US tech giants and whatnot. But obviously there are risks right? With sending such a key piece of hardware into a foreign market, you don't know where else it's going to end up. So there's been some really crazy brainstorming ideas around this. Go about, like in the offices that make these decisions. And one of those ideas has been installing tracker chips on your GPU chips so that you can make sure that the chips are used in the right facility. So I don't know, like maybe if they're using GPU chips at a like a nuclear proliferation site, or if the GPU chips are being moved to perform edge AI on weapon systems and stuff like that, or even if these GPU chips are making their way into other countries, like other countries that are considered political adversaries of the U.S., like Iran or North Korea, then this is going to set off alarms. How feasible it's going to be to put in tracker chips into H20 chips, I don't know, but it's an idea that's been floated. So the U.S. is really trying everything it can, in collaboration with Nvidia, obviously, everything it can to try to make sure that it's still able to sell to China while maintaining their supremacy in the AI arms race over China, and making sure that these chips don't fall into the wrong hands. So it's a balancing act with so many balls being juggled in the air. Here's the other confounding curveball in this situation, something to consider, and that is it actually is in the US's best interest that China uses its AI hardware, the hardware that performs the bedrock of the AI stack, Nvidia chips, instead of pressuring China into speeding up development of its Huawei chips, of its native Huawei chips, which, may be a bit hypocritical because the U.S. doesn't allow Huawei chips in any of our sensitive technologies, right, for, I guess, privacy reasons above other issues. I mean, if we can put trackers in our chips, so can they, right? They could definitely put surveillance tech in their chips that they ship over to the U.S. But the fact of the matter is that the Nvidia chips are so good that China is willing to take a risk, I assume, on the U.S. installing surveillance tech on their GPUs, right? But the reason I think that the U.S. has a vested interest in China using their chips is because if a lot of AI companies in China adopt the standard Nvidia GPUs with the software suite that comes with it, the other piece that isn't talked about all that much is how prevalent and well adopted the CUDA software suite is, which is a software that goes hand in hand with the Nvidia GPUs that make processing tasks on these Nvidia GPUs extremely efficient. So if a lot of these Chinese tech companies, AI tech companies, get hooked on Nvidia hardware and Nvidia software, aka American hardware software, then it's going to be very hard for these companies to undo a lot of that work and move it over to Chinese native AI hardware and software. So yeah, in a lot of ways, I think this does make sense for the US to play this game and to allow a lot of chips to make their way into China. But at the end of the day, it's hard to ignore the fact that China accounts for 13% of Nvidia's revenue. And in fact, because of the export controls that have been put in place this year and the missed deliveries that were supposed to happen to China, Nvidia projects that there's going to be an $8 billion loss in the first fiscal quarter of 2026. So I don't know, come earnings call time, I know like a lot of people that aren't paying attention to the news right now and how these export controls are going to be sending ripples into the future are going to be in for a little bit of a shock when, I assume, I'm not a financial advisor, but Nvidia stock's going to be taking a hit. But again, if you're strong on fundamentals, if you're a long-term investor, it shouldn't really affect you. If anything, that should be a buying opportunity for you to load up more on Nvidia stock. Anyway, that is my take for today. Thank you for tagging along. I hope the audio quality was better for this video. I'll see you in the next